The sounds of gunfire piercing the night in Nuevo Laredo. Gang members paralyzing traffic with spike strips. Charred tractor trailers lining the highway.
You underestimate people of that caliber, you're doomed.
The town has become a place where these two gangs clash.
You might not be aware of just how badly the narco world got shaken up just a few days ago. It might have been a regular Sunday for you and me, but for members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, April 21st, 2024, marked the beginning of the end. Or did it? Let's expand on that for a bit. It's like stepping into a scene of a gripping crime drama. Except this isn't fiction. It's the real deal. Picture this. You find yourself in the heart of the action with none other than Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho'a, the show leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. El Mencho'a world is rocked by a seismic event of unprecedented magnitude. You see, it's not just his criminal enterprise that stands threatened to crumble, but his personal life too. His brother, Abraham Oseguera Cervantes, or Don Rodo for short, finds himself in hot water these days, and not just any hot water, the kind that's bubbling with trouble.
Elementos de la Guardia Nacional capturaron a Abraham N. Don Rodo, hermano del líder del cártel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, Nemesio N., conocido como el Mencho.
After years of efforts to bring Don Rodo to justice, it seems that the authorities' quest to capture this elusive kingpin who terrorized Jalisco for the better part of a decade has finally reached its conclusion. But Don Rodo's capture might not be the blessing that you might think it is. You see, many comparisons can be drawn between narco empires and beehives. That's right, beehives. And what happens when you tug at a hive for too long? Well, let's just say swift retaliation might be what's in store for you, and you better run to take cover.
It's a job for kids who have the street in their blood, who've grown up with violence. They are young men just like me. We look normal, but we're sick in the head. I see myself as a good guy, but if you mess with me, I'll you up. I'll kill you.
Get ready for a deep dive into the ruthless Jalisco New Generation Cartel and its bosses to find out what their next move might be. But just a fair warning, some of the stuff that we're going to uncover is deeply unsettling, so please be mindful of that. Now, let's begin. If you're up to date on all things cartel, it's difficult not to be acquainted with the name Oseguera. If cartels are empires, then the Oseguera family is basically royalty. Their brutal organization and technologically advanced intimidation tactics have been plaguing Mexico for years. And when it comes to the state of Jalisco in particular, every local has suffered at the hands of their Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG for short, in one way or another, but more on that later. Now, with this in mind, it's easy to see why Don Rodo's arrest came as a huge relief to just about anyone who isn't affiliated with the Oseguera family. After all, one man down is always great news when the man in question is literally evil, right? Well, it's the answer to that is far more complicated than it seems. So let's first tell the tale of how this arrest came to be in the first place. His brother and true leader of the CJNG cartel, who goes by the name of El Mencho'a, currently has a hefty bounty of $10 million hanging right over his head. And that's just the reward for any information that might lead the authorities to capture him. So, as you can probably guess, there's no shortage of people willing to cash in on such a life-changing sum of money. This means that both El Mencho'a and his family have to be extremely careful with whom they choose to associate, because, as the saying goes, bad guys need to get lucky every time, while good guys only really need to get lucky once. So any move that's not completely thought through may prove itself to be a fatal mistake. And while El Mencho'a is definitely the big fish for most, some people with ties to the cartel have realized that there's no point in going after the grand prize when they can settle for a more achievable goal, getting Don Rodo in trouble instead. Think about it. With every piece of evidence pointing toward Don Rodo having a more administrative role within the criminal underworld, he probably doesn't have to watch his back nearly as much as his brother, so why not go after him? Well, that's exactly what they did. It's believed it was a deal struck between Mexican law enforcement and traders with ambition from deep within the CJNG that got Don Rodo arrested on that fateful day of April 21st, 2024. That morning, shortly before 4 a.m., the Mexican National Guard descended into a compound in the municipality of Outlan de Navarro that they believed was one of the Oseguera family's many hideouts. They were right, and Don Rodo was there. Now, picture the scene. Police and military are on high alert, bracing for retaliation attacks from Cartel Jalisco. It's like a powder keg, ready to explode, but miraculously, the expected retribution attacks fail to materialize. Still, Abraham's fate hangs in the balance as he's whisked away to Mexico City to avoid any further chaos. But wait, there's more. Abraham's journey is far from over. In fact, it only begins when he's transported to none other than the Altiplano Maximum Security Federal Prison, a place where dreams of freedom go to die. You see, this fortress-like institution is only reserved for Mexico's worst of the worst. Located in the neighborhood of Almoloya de Juarez, this prison has seen the who's who of Mexico's criminals, as its most vicious outlaws always land in here thanks to the prison's zero-tolerance policy for any deviation from their strict protocol. It's pretty safe to say that once you go in, you stay in, or is it? Now, let's peel back the layers of Don Rodo's enigmatic persona. This guy's no ordinary Joe, but he's been so shrouded in mystery for all these years that it's easy to forget just how dangerous he really is. And although Don Rodo isn't your typical bloodthirsty cartel boss, he's been the man behind the scenes of some of the worst crimes that the CJNG has ever committed. You could say that it's thanks to him that the CJNG is the second most powerful cartel in Mexico, right after El Chapo's infamous Sinaloa cartel. So who are the CJNG exactly, and how did their rise to total domination even come about? Let's break down the twisted world of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Imagine a Mexican criminal group that started out as merely a rebel squad within the Sinaloa cartel, only to soon break off and do its own thing. This is how CJNG got its start. With the ambitious and menacing El Mencho'a at its forefront, these guys quickly became top players in Mexico's tricky criminal landscape.
The CJNG are now recognized as such a threat to US national security that there have even been moves to officially designate them a terrorist organization.
To make matters worse, as is the case with most drug cartels, they weren't just into drug dealing. They dug their fingers in pretty much every bad pie that you can think of. Extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, you name it. They even controlled stuff like avocado and oil trades in some Mexican states. Nothing got past them, and they weren't playing small either. Their presence was felt in nearly every state of Mexico, and everything they touched turned to dust and chaos.
Mexico is experiencing a sharp rise in violence. Some of the most notable examples in recent weeks include a series of roadside bombs in the state of Jalisco that left 4 police officers dead.
Now, to keep their evil empire growing, they made friends in all the wrong places. You see, cartel alliances were quite common. Why waste precious resources fighting your rivals when you can just join in on the fun and take over even more turf? But unlike some of their rivals, the CJNG ran a tight ship with a strict hierarchy that kept everyone in line.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
But here's where it really gets messy. These guys were seriously violent. They saw fear as a weapon in and of itself and terrorized civilians in their territory for years in order to keep anyone brave enough to stand up to them at arm's reach. And it's like something out of a crazy action movie, too. You see, the CJNG distinguishes itself from other cartels through one very distinct and unexpected feature: technology. You heard that right? The CJNG ushered cartel violence into the 21st century.
This is modern warfare. We use war technologies. We use drones. Here, everybody is adequately trained to use them to the maximum so that they can hear that thunder.
¿Un dron o qué? Ese mero, ese mero. ¿Dónde está el dron? Está volando derecho arriba.
The Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade, killing people, 6 of them, last week.
You can imagine how that translates into absolute power as far as they're concerned. And now that we've grasped the full extent of the CJNG's brutality, we get a much clearer picture as to why Don Rodo's arrest is such a big deal. But when dealing with one of the top bosses of one of the most feared criminal establishments that Mexico has ever seen, you can't help but wonder, what's the price we're willing to pay? We know Abraham's been pulling the strings on drug shipments to the US, controlling trafficking routes like a puppet master. But could there be more to his story? There have been hints at the possibility of extradition to the land of the free, which, when you're a kingpin, is a fate that's worse than any other. Think about it this way. There's no bribe big enough to buy yourself out of a US prison, not is there any friendly face to ease your time in jail. There's just cold, hard time behind bars. No wonder it's the worst fear of any brutal cartel leader. It basically means that you no longer exist. Your name is now replaced by a mere inmate number, amongst many other inmate numbers, and you're forced to spend the remainder of your life reminiscing about the mistakes which you've made. But wait, let's rewind to 2013. The thing is, Don Rodo's no stranger to trouble. Quite the contrary, he faced a murder charge back in his home state of Michoacan, sending tongues wagging about his ties to organized crime. And here's the kicker. The charges mysteriously vanished into thin air, leaving us all scratching our heads as to how this is even possible. And although there's little information out there about whether or not the crime even had anything to do with the cartel, one thing remains certain. Don Rodo is just as capable of being ruthless as he is of taking care of cartel logistics. Having spent 4 long decades deeply involved in the life of crime that he's now known for, Don Rodo, together with El Mencho, was running somewhat of a family enterprise. They initially ran a modest heroin operation in the Bay Area of San Francisco back in the 90s, but then a deal went south and they found themselves in muddy waters for the very first time. The year was 1992, when undercover cops made their move and arrested both of the brothers. Although just 26 years old at the time, and much younger than his brother, El Mencho was smart enough to recognize that they were being set up that night in a San Francisco bar called Imperial during what was supposed to be an ordinary heroin transaction. You see, El Mencho noticed that the dollar bills they had received were neatly stacked on top of one another, which came in stark contrast to the creased and dirty dollar bills that they usually got during their many drug transactions. And so, eagle-eyed El Mencho tried to warn his brother that this might be an ambush, but their call was intercepted by the authorities, and both he and Don Rodo got captured just 3 weeks after the fact. And they would have likely faced a very, very long time in prison, never to be heard from again, had it not been for one difficult to wrap your head around mistake on the US's side. You see, during the trial, their defense team urged them to plead guilty in front of a jury. They seemed to think that this strategy would land them shorter prison sentences due to the nature of the offense, and they were right. El Mencho was looking at 5 years behind bars, and while Don Rodo received double of that, it was still a pretty lax prison sentence compared to what others were getting. But here's the thing, for one reason or another, but probably for the lack of better judgment, they decided to extradite them all the way back to Mexico. And, as they say, the rest is CJNG history, because, once back to their hometown, they spared no time and went on to build one of the most powerful drug cartels from the ground up. Once back, the brothers go on to sign a pact with El Chapo himself. They and their group of thugs land the sweet deal of taking care of the Sinaloa drug operations, finances, and even murder activities in the states of Colima and Jalisco. But El Mencho knew that he was destined for greater things than just being El Chapo's minion, so he eventually broke off from the organization and established his own enterprise. After all, he did possess the all know-how that was necessary, and thus, the CJNG was born. El Mencho was quick to establish that the CJNG weren't playing around either. They launched a firestorm of public displays of unimaginable violence in order to send the message that a new, more brutal cartel was in town. Not only that, but they turned out to be extremely profitable too, with the US government estimating that the group has about $50 billion in total assets. To give you an idea, that's enough to land El Mencho on the cover of Forbes magazine many times over.
Yo sé quién es el patrón, señor Don Mencho, una persona muy honorable y las personas que lo conocen saben la calidad de persona que es.
All right, now that we've established the true scale of the CJNG cartel, let's delve deeper into the labyrinth world of El Mencho and his tangled web of family ties, cartel politics, and the relentless pursuit of power and profit. You heard that right. You see, Don Rodo isn't the only Oseguera that Mexico should be concerned about. Surprisingly, the cartels can be unexpectedly progressive when it comes to gender roles within the organization, and women can be in charge too. So, let's shine a spotlight on the women behind the CJNG throne. Meet Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, a Mexican businesswoman with several successful enterprises to show for. Sounds impressive, right? Well, she's also a suspected money launderer of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. She even served time in a Mexican prison for financial offenses. Not only that, but up until 2018, she was also the wife of none other than El Mencho. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as even her and El Mencho's daughter, Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, have also been previously incarcerated for, you guessed it, money laundering. Though released in 2022, her time behind bars speaks volumes about the family's involvement in the murky world of Mexico's criminal underbelly. But wait until you hear of El Mencho's other daughter, Laisha Michelle Oseguera Gonzalez. At the tender age of 23, she's already been accused of orchestrating the kidnapping of 2 sailors in Jalisco, alongside her boyfriend, Christian Fernando Gutierrez. If that's not enough to thrust you into the spotlight of Mexico's vivid cartel life, then I don't know what is. Once information was obtained by these captives, typically through torture, these individuals were killed, either by or at the direction of the Chapitos themselves, and the bodies disposed of throughout the area. While many of these victims were shot, others were fed dead or alive to tigers. And you didn't think that El Mencho's own son is any less of a menace than his famous pops, did you? Quite the opposite, actually. Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, affectionately dubbed El Menchito, is already in prison as we speak, with federal charges that accuse him of helping run his father's organization. And he's not just in any prison. Remember when I said that any cartel member's worst nightmare is US extradition? Well, let's just say El Menchito's not getting a good night's worth of sleep.
Judy, this is the story of like father, like son. The men oversee Mexico's most feared new generation cartel, according to law enforcement, that controls the vast majority of illicit drugs sold in Metro Chicago. Tonight, the man they call El Mencho is still a fugitive, but his son, the so-called Menchito, has just been extradited from Mexico to face U.S. prosecution. For drug agents tonight, if they can't get the dad, his son is the next best thing.
And there's rumors that he might have struck a plea deal too. Does that mean that he'll snitch on his own family? Only time will tell. One thing is clear, however, and it's that all of these recent arrests have ushered in uncertain times as far as El Mencho is concerned. With most of El Mencho's family finding themselves behind bars, many folks are wondering what this could spell out for the future of the CJNG. Questions are swirling, especially about El Mencho's present involvement with the cartel itself, as some people have theorized that he's now just overseeing things from a distance, rather than getting his hands dirty in the day-to-day grind of the cartel. And why would he get himself in an even more compromising position than the one he's currently in now? Instead of just cashing in on the many financial benefits a more relaxed role within the organization has to offer? But wait, there's more. El Mencho might have finally cashed in on the biggest check yet. You see, there's been a recent update on his brother's case. Well, if you consider him evading justice yet again to be an update. Remember Don Rodo's arrest? The one that sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld? As the brother of one of Mexico's most powerful and elusive drug lords, you'd think his capture would be seen as a significant enough of a blow to warrant extra handling care. For days, speculation ran wild about what his arrest could mean for the cartel's hierarchy and its ongoing conflicts with rival gangs and government forces. However, just as quickly as he was apprehended, Don Rodo was released, leaving many scratching their heads and fueling further speculation. Needless to say, rumors swirled about backroom deals, political pressure, and the intricacies of the Mexican justice system. And who can blame these rumors? It's utterly outrageous. How can this be? Turns out, there's strong evidence pointing towards Don Rodo's release being part of a larger-scale negotiation between the cartel and law enforcement. A strategic move, if you will, to maintain a delicate balance of power in the region. Not everyone is as optimistic, however, with some suggesting that his release was simply the result of legal technicalities of insufficient evidence to hold him. Regardless of the reasons behind his release, Don Rodo's freedom has reignited concerns about the cartel's influence and the many challenges faced by law enforcement in combating organized crime. It raises questions about the effectiveness of Mexico's justice system and the ongoing struggle to dismantle powerful criminal networks. And to make matters even worse, in the wake of Don Rodo's release, tensions are now higher than ever, as rival cartels jockey for power and law enforcement agencies redouble their efforts to bring down El Mencho and his associates. This still very much ongoing situation remains volatile, with the potential for further violence and instability looming on the horizon.
We can say that Jalisco New Generation is enemy number one of President Enrique Peña Nieto's government now.
And as the dust settles from Don Rodo's sudden release, this is clear: the world of organized crime is as complex and unpredictable as ever. With billions of dollars at stake and countless lives hanging in the balance, the battle between cartels and law enforcement continues to unfold in the shadows, with Don Rodo's release serving as just the latest twist in an ongoing saga of greed, power, and deception. But let's leave this on a more positive note. The thing is, even if El Mencho is now basking in the glory of this 1F victory, the larger scale battle between good and evil still remains a marathon, not a sprint. And while unsuccessful, Don Rodo's arrest also serves as a reminder that no one is completely immune to the law, and eventually, they will all be brought to justice. Do you think El Mencho will continue to evade justice through his sneaky tactics? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you've enjoyed our video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure you subscribe to our channel in order to never miss another video ever again. Until next time, stay safe.